Back on this Sunday morning, we're glad to have you with us here on Inside Tennessee in the Round, and we want to break down the primary election. We just got done talking with Chris Davis about the low turnout in this election. John, you have more specifics on individual races.
Yeah, just a few numbers that I looked at. First of all, Chris said about 38,000 votes cast total in this primary we just finished with. We had 49,652 in the comparable 2018 primary, so you can see how far down we were, which is interesting. The other thing I thought, we were talking crossover and what all this meant, and I looked at the District 1 school board race, which was just Democrats. We had no Republicans running whatsoever. That total for votes cast for those two candidates was 1,141. In 2018, there were 2,654 votes cast total in that same school board district race. So it's indicative of a couple things. Some fall out and then fall off, and then I would guess also a fair bit of crossover, particularly in that district. And I'm guessing that probably a lot of those folks were drawn to to sheriff's race.
Mm-hmm. Susan, we'll get to that sheriff's race in just a second. Who does turnout help when it's low, and who does it hurt?
Well, it depends on where you are. In Knox County, obviously, the bigger turnout benefits Republicans because, as Chris said, generally it's about a, 65, 35, or 70, 30, something like that, Republican to Democrat ratio.
And this is a primary race, so you've got to choose one.
Yeah.
But does name recognition matter?
Name recognition matters, money matters, all the knocking on doors matters in local races like this. When I meet with potential candidates, in this county, I say, look, you got to put on your tennis shoes and your blue jeans and go around and knock on doors, because people expect that, particularly in school board races and, state representative
district races, smaller races.
Even Tim Burchett still knocks on doors.
He does.
So it's an important thing.
He kept Stacey Canfield in office way longer than it should.
He did, and as we know, he had a doppelganger that knocked on doors and looked just like him.
But he was effective at it.
It was very good.
Strategy.
Yeah, but it's important to do the basic things in these county races.
Any other global thoughts on turnout before we get to a specific race?
No, I think Susan's right, but I do think that the turnout, where turnout is strong or weak within Knox County does matter, and it can help, although not cure the fairly bright red of the county. But if you get some of the outlying edges of the county that aren't turning out for whatever reason, whatever lack of interest, whatever it may be, it does help the Democrats. But the Democrats simply have to do, you talk about name recognition, we've just got to do a better job of recruiting local candidates that are known to run for offices. There were too many no candidate qualified on that ballot, and if we want to be competitive at a county-wide level, we've got to start. We may not win, but we have to start. The city at one point was not near as blue as it is, and now it's hard for a Republican to win a seat in the city.
Let's talk about what was labeled the big race, and that was the sheriff's race between former Sheriff J.J. Jones and current Sheriff Tom Spangler. And Tom Spangler won that handily, 71%, and he won both the early vote and Election Day vote handily. Don, you talked about this on election night. What stood out to you about that win?
Susan and I both agreed, the margin. This was a candidate that ran against Tom Spangler that had name recognition, that everybody knew. He was our sheriff for 10 years when you talk about the Black Wednesday add-on that he got. And so I was very surprised by that. About the margin. Not surprised that Tom Spangler won. I've said this before, as a community, really since that time, 10 years plus ago, we don't like recycled candidates, and JJ was perceived as a recycled candidate. It really sort of is the end of the Tim Hutchison era, just not the JJ Jones era. It sort of ends that era that goes all the way back, and so that's really what stood out in that race.
Susan, any takeaway from that race for you?
I think one of the things that was interesting to me was the race before, where Lee Trammell ran against Tom Spangler, and if y'all recall, that race was called at 5 minutes after 8 because of the massive number of votes.
Lee did better than JJ.
Lee did better than JJ, which really surprised me.
I would not have predicted that.
Nor would I. That one surprised me a lot.
Another race I want to get to, and this was the open seat for Trustee, basically the county banker. On the Republican side, we had Justin Biggs, who has the name recognition of being a county commissioner leaving that post, not running for another 4 years because he wants to work in the highest level of an office he already works in. Susan, what was your takeaway from the trustee?
Well, I
race?
think I expected Justin to win just because he did have more name ID than Richard Jacobs. There was a lot of, I would say, more moderate Republicans that wanted to see a qualified, really experienced accountant or someone, a businessman, run against Justin because they had concerns because it is the county's bank. But Justin's worked there 15 years. He should know how to run that office, and he won fairly substantially.
Let me throw this out there, though. Somebody made the observation to me, somebody whose opinion I respect a lot, a Republican, who said that margin was a little closer than Justin Biggs may have anticipated, so he should pay attention to that.
It was 15,000 to about 11,000. So, but again, Jacobs was a name already on the ballot from mayor, and some people may have confused that.
That's possible, but the actual candidate's only lived here since what, 2018?
Yeah, not very long.
Not very long.
But if you looked at his yard signs, AtLarge Jacobs, trustee.
And he was a credible candidate. On paper, he looked very qualified, likely was. But again, Justin Biggs, political family, been in the office for 15 years, good experience, fairly non-controversial on county commission. A few things that went on that bothered some folks, but generally has done well and scandal-free. And which is something to be said sometimes in this community. And I don't think either Susan or I are surprised that Justin won.
His at-large seat 11, was open, and we saw Devin Driscoll and Kim Frazier battling for that seat. And Susan, at least going into this, I think a lot of Republicans were thinking that was going to be a pretty tight race. It ended up not being quite as close as I think a lot of people predicted. What do you say?
Yeah, I think the betting money would have put it on Devin Driscoll because he had a lot of financial support from developers and well-known Republicans in this county. Kim Frazier was newer to Republican politics, at least to the party structure. She's very engaged in community in Hardin Valley and advocated to get the schools there. I'll tell you what I'm hearing more than anything. She had her picture on her signs, and she's a very attractive woman. Now, I hate to say that, but I promise you, all over this county, hey, she won because she, had her sign, her pictures.
She's got a
on
little
her
battle in the general election.
She
Vivian
will.
Shipe, that's a good candidate that our party has put up. And again, while the Republicans have a historic edge in Knox County, Vivian Shipe's going to mount a good race and is a good candidate. So that'll be interesting to see.
We're going to take a quick break on Inside Tennessee. We'll talk a little money when we come back and more of the fallout from this primary election with this panel when we come back.